So 5 years later, we finally have the sequel to Pacific Rim, but unfortunately it isn't quite as good as the first one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Worth Watching, the show where we take a look at movies, TV shows, and other forms of video entertainment to tell you whether or not they're worth spending time on. So Pacific Rim Uprising is the sequel to the 2013 movie Pacific Rim. It's about basically giant robots fighting giant monsters. Now if you've already seen the trailer for Uprising, it's exactly what you would expect from the trailer. If you're just looking to see giant robots smash giant monsters and things like that, that's exactly what you're gonna get. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite build off the momentum and sort of like the established lore and story that the first movie built during its release 5 years ago. So in Uprising, we have a new main character played by John Boyega, and I have to say he is a better lead compared to Charlie Hunnam in the first movie, but at the same time I can't say that the other supporting and secondary characters were as good as the first movie. Because in the first movie we had, Mako, we had Pentecost, we had the other pilots, namely the Aussies, and in this one we don't have characters that are quite so well defined and well characterized. Their storylines just aren't as interesting as like Mako's. That was definitely a weak part of the movie, like I didn't really care for a lot of the secondary characters and side characters. If they died or if they didn't die, whatever the story arcs were, I didn't really care. And speaking of story arcs, I feel like that's another problem with Uprising, is that there's a couple intertwined storylines that feel a bit rushed, It's like they want to introduce all these different elements to tie into the main story, and in a way they do, but everything just feels really rushed. Like before something gets resolved or developed properly, it goes on and skips to the next story, or it skips it goes straight to like the end or something like that. So you don't really fully get the gist of the story. Maybe you do, but it's not developed well. So with that in mind, it also affects the pacing, which I felt was a bit rushed and a bit slow at certain points. Another thing that's missing is just the overall tone and feel of the movie is very different. Uprising is more colorful. A lot of the fight scenes happen in the daytime. It's much more cartoony, I would say, maybe even a bit more kiddish. But I mean, I'm not expecting a lot of story behind a movie that basically is about giant robots versus giant monsters. But the first Pacific Rim sold it well through its art direction, through its story. There was that grittiness to it, the way the Jaegers moved, the way the story progressed, where Charlie Day had to go find Hannibal Chow and all that cool stuff. And there's a lack of that in Uprising, which affects the overall tone of the movie. It just doesn't feel as serious, and doesn't feel as the stakes are not as high. And to add to that, they kind of stepped over a lot of the established story arcs and things that we learned from the first movie. So it doesn't build upon them, rather it just decides to retcon a couple things and change the way certain things are explained. And overall, the movie just seems to lack those epic moments. Like in the first movie again, Raleigh has his brother killed, getting ripped out of the Jaeger, and then he still managed to defeat the Kaiju on his own, and then pilot the Jaeger back to shore on his own. And of course he had the heroic sacrifice where the Aussie and Pentecost killed themselves so that they could give Raleigh a shot to the breach and stuff. And in Uprising, there is nothing of that magnitude in terms of the emotional weight and the epicness of it all. So again, it's just not quite as good. But with all that said, I mean, most people would go into this movie expecting to see giant robots fight giant monsters. And again, that's pretty much what happens. I mean, you can't really go wrong with those parts. The fight scenes are cool. The Jaegers move in a very different way as well compared to the first movie, where they're kind of slow. You can feel the weight behind them, behind the punches and all. Here they're much faster, and I get that it's been 10 years since. I mean, in the movie's timeline, it's been 10 years since the original film. So I guess in 10 years technology has improved so that these massive machines can move much faster. But I kind of enjoyed the old, again, gritty style where everything's kind of slow and heavy. But I mean, to each their own. I still enjoyed some of the fight scenes in this one. There were some pretty cool stuff. I still very much enjoyed the first one way more than Uprising. So whether it's worth watching, I would say it's a maybe. If you enjoy the movie and you manage your expectations for what you're gonna see. Don't expect brilliant acting apart from, I guess, John Boyega. Don't expect a story that is exciting or even makes sense. Just expect to see robots and monsters punching each other and all that cool stuff. So anyway, those are my thoughts on Pacific Rim Uprising. If you've seen it, let me know what you think in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.